Professor Dela's presentation. I want to thank, firstly, the organizers for inviting me. And the reason we started with that was the main reason they invited me. They wanted me to share some of the insights. Secondly, I want to thank, sometimes I call him Prof, sometimes I call him Doctor, sometimes I call him Brother Dela. There's a common saying these days about being disruptive if you want to change. Dela has just disrupted my presentation. I could say after that, let's get into discussion. But there's also something that I value and treasure. That is the confirmation of the Holy Spirit. I felt like, but he's taking that. That's what I was going to say about that. A few minutes later, that was. So I want to thank the Holy Spirit for the confirmation. My team, you have to follow me very carefully because after that disruption, I'm going to change my presentation slightly and sometimes fundamentally. So listen carefully, then you can connect with me. Basically, I want to provide some questions which we can begin to interrogate. My topic was why intentional leadership development is necessary for a common vision. And the main operative word there is intentional. Intentional. Why is it necessary to be intentional? The second question, which you have already heard, is where are we? What is our current state? Let me say at this point, my context, my illustrations will be mostly political and governance. I'm not apologizing, I'm making a statement. So, what is our current state in terms of political and governance leadership development in Africa? I want to emphasize throughout my presentation the African, the Pan-Africanism, because my experiences have been both Zimbabwean and continental, and to a certain extent global. How did we get here is another question I will attempt to answer in order to get at our context. Where do we want to be? That's the common vision we have heard about. And how do we get there in terms of leadership development? And what should be the agenda for the leadership development? Who should be the candidates? And who should be responsible for that leadership development? If I were to ask, which I will not do right now, but maybe I should. What is the first thing without you thinking that comes to your mind when you hear the following terms? Please just say out, okay? African politician. Corruption. Okay. Sorry? Mentally poor. Uh-huh. Too individualistic. Okay. Power hungry. Authoritative. Okay. What comes to your mind when you hear African government or governments? I'm dealing with adults. When I'm with young people, dysfunctional, corruption, partisan, directionless, nepotism, monopolistic, repressive. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the current perception and realities of African political and governance leadership. The current perceptions and realities. It's amazing to me. It doesn't matter whether I'm presenting in Ghana, in Kenya, the answers are the same. And so the question is, how did we get here? How did we get here? Tiri, are you still connected? I want us to have the context, the slide for the context. Prof. Dela has done a good job of painting where we have come from. I want to proffer that we are here because of the historical contexts, periods, eras that we have worked through. Thank you for beginning from way beyond what I was going to begin. You started with ourselves vis-a-vis Egypt and so forth. I just want to say, under context, we have the indigenous knowledge systems. And I'm just focusing on political and governance leadership. We have already heard that we had our kings, which throughout the continent, they are now chiefs. That's part of the contextual development and understanding. But however, within that indigenous political and governance system, there were certain characteristics or commonalities. Kings were born, they were not elected. There were power symbols in different countries. They are power symbols, whether they are leopard skins, gold stools. Think of any country and you can visualize the symbols. How was government conducted? We have different meeting or names for meeting places across Africa, consultative processes across Africa. But the commonality usually is that there was more horizontal than hierarchical power structures. There was more consultative than top-down approaches. Here in Zimbabwe, we have our dares. Of course, they were very chauvinist. No woman was allowed at Padare, although the women influenced a lot of things that went on Padare, because before you went there, you were thoroughly schooled. Or the women gave their opinions indirectly. Quickly, we move on to the next era that was referred to, the colonial era. Totally foreign imposition, new institutions, new ways of doing politics and governance, regarded as alien, not part of us. Then we move quickly to the liberation movements, depending on how independence was obtained in a particular African country. If it involved war, as in Zimbabwe, we have military structures, military cultures, ways of doing things, or protest marches, demonstrations, and the like. Then came independence, which we now contextualize within the global. However, what happened is that in all these things, their influence and impact was not, how do I put it? You did not shed off your complete indigenous system. That's why we heard of the 2 weddings. You did not completely remove your indigenous governance system when you went, say, from indigenous to colonial and to independence. I have often said, let's picture African leaders across Africa. Take a moment, minus the Senegalese. I think we have the youngest president in Senegal, right? We have relatively older people who have life experiences of indigenous political and governance systems. They grew up or born under kingship or chieftainships. And to this day, we have them, those systems, or albeit modified. Picture that person or those persons going through a liberation struggle. If it was militarily, they acquired a military culture. If it was demonstrations and whatever, they also acquired that. Then we became independent. What has happened to the context? Mentally, and I'm speaking from experience, I was a representative of Mutoko South for 19 years. And Mutoko South had very strong traditional systems in one end, as well as, if you came to Mutoko Center, a little bit of modernization. In between were either traditional villages or communal areas. We also had African purchase areas, people who had bought their farms and so forth. So as I moved as MP, my experiences in Chije which was very remote from Mutoko Center, was totally different because the chief has a lot of influence compared to a chairman of a party at Mutoko Center. And the same day I have made those meetings from Chije, Mutoko Center, I come to Parliament. And Parliament is an exact replica of the British Parliament. Even in the color of seats, can you imagine? I thank God that we now have a new parliament with different color seats. We reproduced or adopted without adaptations. And yet we had these influences from the different periods. My characterization of the African political and governance system is one which has a lot of historical baggage, depending on the age and gender maybe of the leader we are trying to develop. A lot of times we don't stop to think or to say what could be causing this. If, for example, in the tradition of the king, we revered a king, utmost respect, you get to Parliament and there is a heckling system. You actually heckle when a person who is a leader, whether they are minister or whoever, you see the difference. The culture shock. I've watched in our Parliament and sometimes even prayed. For example, when there's an official opening of Parliament, we have the president, the military chiefs, and the parliamentarians. And parliamentarians start behaving the way they know how to behave in Parliament. Heckling. Can you imagine what is going through the head of that military person or leader? These are some of the dynamics that we don't often see or think about as affecting, influencing some of the behaviors. I am not justifying any behavior, but I am just saying the context of where we have been, where we have come from, has a lot to do sometimes with where we are. Let me quickly go to how do we get a common vision. I am always amazed because the way Prof presents, I was looking forward to something else today, and today was totally different. But I'll just say, we already have visions described, written. There was reference to the African Union Agenda 2063, the Africa that we envisage. There was supposed to be a process. We actually went through a process, country by country, to contribute to that vision. Whether countries took them seriously or not, there's an Agenda 2063. The aspirations are good and excellent. I zero in on an Africa of good governance, whose development and involves participation of all its peoples, including young people and women. So we have the AU Agenda 2063. We have the United Nations SDGs. That's what 2030 is all about. It's from those SDGs. It's up to a country and a people to see what that vision will come to when it is contextualized, or if it is contextualized. So, in the process of casting common visions, what do we need to take into account? I'm going to skip some of my presentations, but I will also invite you to get a copy of the book. I refer to some of the things I have skipped. What do we need in a vision of leadership development, political and governance leadership development? What should the agenda be for developing those leaders? One, we need knowledge. I've described the parliament. Most citizens know parliament from a distance, from TV, from newspapers. What actually is parliament, how it works, very few people know, including those of us who become politicians. In fact, my book was inspired by my own experience. I didn't want any next generation politician to go through the way that I did. I mean, I was coming from university, being a lecturer, I knew politics and so forth. But when I got into the political game, the governance system, it was totally new, very far removed. How much do people know about the institutions of significant leadership in our countries? That lack of knowledge or ignorance shortchanges the citizenry, shortchanges even you, the politician. Let me give an example of how these adopted without adaptation institutions can do or have done in Africa. Parliaments and parliamentarians, rather, have become mini government or donor agencies. That's how most MPs are viewed. You're supposed to provide the scholarships, build the clinics, roads, you name it, funeral policies. You are like, there's a funeral and you are expected to contribute. Not contribute in the sense that we do normally, but being responsible for. So, because of that, the actual role of the MP or roles of the MP is not being effectively practiced across Africa. For example, if in Zimbabwe I say 3 C's, it has different connotations, but I will use them because that's what Parliament is about. You have a constituency which you are representing. You have a chamber, the House, where you participate. you have a committee where you belong. You need to be prepared, developed, trained, inducted to know how to operate in each of those things. But what happens? I just have the zeal, the passion to be a politician. I run and I win and I get into parliament. Yes, we have orientation systems that are different in different countries. Some have more advanced than others when you have actually gotten there, but nothing prepares you beforehand. Hence, you end up doing things that you are not supposed to be responsible for. My role as an MP is to go to Parliament, ensure there is legislation that ensures equitable development, including my constituents. I don't become an MP to become a donor agency or a mini government responsible for development projects. I can facilitate. When I understand how government and ministries work, then I can approach my work in a manner that ensures development in my constituency. Or if I'm prepared for participation in the chamber, I can ask questions that holds the executive accountable for things happening in my constituency and so forth. When I go for committee work, I am giving the country, the participants, the citizenry, the voters time to give their views. All those, in my opinion and experience, need preparation, and we are operating with institutions that we have adopted without adapting to our contextual environments in Africa. Let me say, as the bishop said, when you highlight the problems, you give solutions. Let me quickly go to some of the things that I think should be pillars. I've skipped a lot. Should be pillars of leadership development for political and governance participation. One, this idea of having a common vision. It is so important. Even a common vision of the nature of development that should be taking place. The nature of the leadership development that should be taking place. Investing in the future. I liked that point about us Africans not having a very futuristic. I always say we were very seasonal. You did your agriculture to ensure that you have food to take you from one season to the other. To come up with a 30-year food security, agro-industry based economic development and so forth takes a lot of movement from that seasonal planning to long-term planning. A good example, there was one World Cup, football World Cup. I was not feeling well, so I had time to listen to the radio, and there was a discussion. Our minister, Muzembi, was Minister of Tourism at that time, and he was going to bring, I think it was the Brazilian team here and so forth, because he wanted to inspire young people to be one day playing for Zimbabwe to win. School children. And when it came to question time, somebody says, Minister, Who will be alive then? I mean, that's how short-sighted we can be. Who will be alive then? These changes that we were seeing, being given as an example, who will be alive to see them? So having a common vision of Pan-Africanism, I have a very, very painful experience, a recent experience. There is a United Nations Commission on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. There was an election taking place and countries put candidates. Africa has about the biggest voting bloc as a continent. It put 5 candidates, 5. And 2 of them were actually endorsed. Guess what? Not one African managed to win. And the best lost by 11 votes. About lack of African unity. How unstrategic can you become? Fielding 5 candidates, not one gets in. So a common vision is very important. If we are going to be global players, political players, how strategic should we be? How do we train or prepare leaders for these kinds of things? We need a new political and governance culture. One that is knowledge and value-based. Knowledge and value-based. We have to know the institutions that we are working with. And my desire is to see those institutions adopted or transformed to fit the contextual requirements of Africa. Let me say, as I am about to conclude, that I also believe very strongly that the church, the church is the most important element of these pillars in terms of organizations. I'm not a theologian, but I love my Bible. Somehow, the church in Africa, where we are nicely dressed on Sundays as described, has failed to make our faith a living faith, a faith to live by. Whether we are in politics, business, or wherever. Because the church has all these people from different political parties. How come we are losing, or we are not able to have a uniting effect? Oh, let me say, last year about this time, I had an amazing privilege, courtesy of Prof, and also courtesy of my book, because the organizers of that conference had read my book and invited me to a conference in Ghana. The conference was organized by the Church of Pentecost in Ghana. The conference, which had 5,000 delegates, was totally paid for in all aspects by the church. The conference, I had an amazing privilege of being the only non-Ghanaian, but more important, the privilege of seeing and being on the same platform with 3 presidents, Kafua, Mahama, the current one had to go on an AU mission immediately. Then he brought his vice president. They were all on the same platform. And all of them had come with their followers as delegates in this 5,000-seater hall. And the church had the leadership. There was a time when, when we are excited, the grassroots, when our particular leader is introduced, we want to sing and make noises. Oh, the moral authority of the chairman of the Church of Pentecost to stand up and say, we are here to develop a moral vision for Ghana, not for our political parties. That was the end of the story. I was so inspired. One of my desires, I think I've mentioned it to Bishop before, let's go and learn from these other churches. When I was in politics, I used to say, when I hear Christians say, politicians are corrupt, they lie, they cheat, they what? I say, yeah. What does the Bible say for the solution? If my people who are called by my name, they are not called by the politicians, do certain things, they come, they pray, they repent, I will heal their land. I don't want to put it so harshly, but I think we have let ourselves down. Thank you very much.